So James, let's now look at video monitoring with this camera. The first time I took this camera out, I just used the rear screen, and outdoors in daylight it was a bit of a nightmare actually. There's no two ways about it. I ended up taking my it was in the summer there when it was really bright and sunny, taking my kind of hooded top and hanging it over the lens, a bit like an old plate camera, a 10x8 sort of glass plate camera, which, you know, in some respects was quite good because it really sort of isolated the outside world and I was just focused on the screen. But the screen, as we understand it, isn't calibrated. So you're not necessarily, you know, what you see is not necessarily what you get. And it's only when you start to bring in external monitoring that you can really start to see color accuracy. But the other thing to consider is some sort of electronic viewfinder. Now, you're not the biggest fan of EVFs, are you? But what's your experience in being like shooting, because you did that wonderful film at the first film you made was at the Notting Hill Carnival. Did you have any problems seeing things? Talk me through the challenges that someone's likely to face when they just get this camera out the box. I mean, obviously there's a sunshade, but it's not that effective, is it? I mean, you know, not disrespect to the guys who made it, but it's kind of like, I take mine off, to be honest, and I'd rather use a jumper. Talk me through your experience of this camera and the monitor on the back of the screen.
Well, like you, when I first got the camera, I took it out and actually, I mean, certainly for outside, it benefits to have the sunscreen than not. But on the first shoot I did in Notting Hill, I took it off because the one thing I didn't like was the fact I wanted to handhold it the entire time.
So if I just take this off for you.
And by keeping the sun shield on, it gets a little bit in the way of being able to hold it nicely. I really like holding it like this. Yeah. And also for that shoot, I took it to a busy, crowded carnival with a million other people there. And the last thing I wanted was to stick out with the camera, so I took it really trying to make it look like a DSLR. So I just had one lens on it, not a cinema prime like this. Yeah. I just had a 17 to 55mm, and I took the sun shield off, and I thought, okay, I'm just gonna try and blend in. And I found it hard work, definitely. It wasn't the sunniest of days, but it was still fairly bright. So I really tried to rely on just using the zebras on the back of the monitor, set to 100, just to make sure that I wasn't overexposing. But I still think, looking at some of that footage now, I think it pushed some of the exposure higher than I would have normally.
But it's also hard to focus, isn't it? You know, if you're getting a lot of ambient light falling on the rear screen, you just can't see the contrast in the scene to pick your focus out properly, even tapping in.
Exactly. I think that, you know, definitely not to negate the fact that tap-in, double tap function is fantastic, but one thing it doesn't help you with is when you want to be able to shoot from different angles. You don't always want to shoot directly behind the screen like this. For a lot of the filming I do, I actually quite like to shoot from sort of waist height or kind of lower, just so that I can be a bit more sort of discreet. I'm not there with a camera at eye line and people. I'm actually just kind of picking off shots here. And to do that, you have to be able to mount an EVF or another screen onto the camera. So one option I think that's slick and I like is to be able to mount, say, the small HD onto the top like this.
Yeah.
And in that respect, you can basically work with the camera at kind of a waist height, but with the small HD, and you can just kind of, you know, with a nice 5.6-inch monitor like this, as long as the monitor has HD SDI in, basically, and the monitor accepts a progressive signal, then it'll work with the camera.
Yeah.
And so that's one route to be able to do it.
Because my preference is the Marshall monitors, and this is their 9-inch monitor. I like this because you've got HDMI in and out and HD SDI in and out. Now, it is a more expensive option, and certainly 9-inch isn't the most practical monitor necessarily for out in the field use, but again, in the kind of studio setups I do, that's a nice option. We've actually got a 7-inch on top of the master camera here, which I find is quite a nice size. They have a smaller 5.6-inch. I find it a little bit too small.
Shooting a gig would be perfect with the 9-inch. That's when you'd be on a tripod, you'd be on a side or something.
You'd have it set up here, so you're actually, I find it just the 9-inch is a great size for really being able to kind of step back and see the overall frame. But you know, it comes down to your budget, it comes down to what you like. I mean, my preference is these because I've got waveform on them, false color, and they're super bright. So outdoors, I can really see what's going on. But the next option, I guess, is some sort of EVF. We've got 3 of the main ones here. I'm going to start with the Zacuto because I think if you already have a Zacuto EVF for your DSLR, I've figured out a way to still use that despite this only being HDMI. There is a solution, so if you already own this and don't want to spend £700 or £800 or $1,000 or thereabouts for one of these dedicated HD SDI EVFs, you can take your Zacuto EVF or any other HDMI only product. And using this is, it's got a load of Velcro on it so you can't see what it is, but it's actually the BlackMagic battery converter. I'll come on to the Velcro in a second, but this is a fairly inexpensive converter that will take HD SDI in and SDI loop out of the machine and also give you HDMI out. So what you're able to do is, and it's got an internal battery so you can power it internally. It's also got 12 to 30 volt input, exactly the same as the camera, and so if you're using a power solution you can distribute power from one source into all these devices. So taking that, plug that into your EVF, and granted it's another box on the camera, but this is where your rigs come in, but you can effectively use the Zacuto EVF with the BlackMagic cinema camera with an HDMI to HD SDI converter. And
that would go for any other HDMI device you have. If you only had the small HD and an HDMI monitor and not with the HD SDI option, then you could use this box as well to convert the signal.
And the reason I've got Velcro all over it is when I rig this on a bigger setup, I'm able to Velcro this onto attachments and add other things to it. So again, this is not ideal for the run and gun style shooting that you might be doing, but if I'm doing more setup stuff in a more kind of cinema environment or a more cinema type rig, then it's normal to have things hanging off. So I might have actually an EVF and a monitor on the camera. Now for that you need bigger rigs, and we'll come on to them. But we've got here a couple of solutions. Now this one we haven't used yet other than in the studio today. Talk to me about this one.
So when we went and shot a piece at 9 Elms in London, and we were going to be shooting all night, I thought one thing I really need to do, as I pointed out, was to be able to shoot from different angles with the camera. So I looked at using this, which worked very effectively, because basically you can power this from Sony batteries, MPF batteries, and then you just essentially fix it straight onto the camera. I use a little articulating arm just to fix it on, and again it takes an HD SDI input straight from the camera, and it's a retina display on here, so it's a nice sharp image that's coming off here. You've also got benefits of extra peaking on there, you've got audio monitoring, and this certainly allowed me to be able to work either on the camera with like a little mini screen to that respect, and to be able to tilt that for any angle I wanted, or also to actually use it as an EVF, and allowed me to work very handheld in that configuration and keep the camera really small and light. And that's what I'm always looking to do. I'm always trying to keep the camera in the smallest practical configuration I can. So this worked really well for that. One of the things that was lacking, which I wished it did have, is a waveform monitor, and that's why I'm interested in this, the new one from Cineroid, because this does have a waveform monitor on, and as well as having audio, peaking. In fact, so far this one seems to kind of tick every box for me in terms of an EVF, because the benefit in the waveform monitor is that as it stands at the moment, whilst we're recording this, the only exposure tools on the camera are the Zebra tools basically, and that will allow you to see peak overexposure. Basically it will allow you to see the sensor clip, but I think it's very important to be able to balance out kind of your image and to get a sense, and I really like working with waveforms and histograms just to know when I'm underexposing as well. And that's part of the thing about the screen on the back. The image looks great off the back of the camera on the screen. It's almost too forgiving, I think, when you're shooting. It sees a little bit more into the black than than you often get.
So what you want a reference monitor, and with a reference monitor you want a reference waveform. Now, even though these monitors are generally 8-bit and we're getting a 10-bit and sometimes 12-bit signal off the camera, I still find the waveform just that little bit of additional confidence. As you say, when you see the highlight clip on the sensor, you know that your highlights are clipping. But for skin tones, you know, you can't measure your entire scene for exposure just on where the highlights clip. You want to know, are your skin tones sitting in that good range of IRE? And for me, that extra reference, I'm with you 100%. This one seems to be, you know, given we've only had it for a couple of hours, the resolution of the screen is very good, and certainly having the waveform. But you know, you can't ignore the fact that if you're already a DSLR owner and you have this kit already, you know, I think this is about 150 quid, maybe a couple of $100. It's another BlackMagic product, and you know, you just Velcro that onto your camera, and off you go. It's a good low-cost option to get you started. Ultimately, yes, I think that having a good quality monitor and maybe an EVF with HD SDI is certainly going to make your package lighter. And certainly when we filmed you in the market, James, I could see that EVF is giving you the opportunity to film in the style that you're used to filming at. The rigs that I've been using tend to be bigger, and I'm still trying to find out what the optimum shooting rig is. And I think the thing that I've noticed is that with this camera, there isn't one size fits all. You're probably going to end up with a number of different configurations depending on what it is you're filming.
Definitely. I mean, I think right now, to keep the camera as small as possible, using, say, this monitor attached here, I mean, you couldn't get much smaller, but also be able to have that different viewable angle, plus the additions of waveform on here, audio metering. And plus, a lot of these things which we want from these monitors are things which may and hopefully will all come to the camera with firmware updates as well. You know, we're sure it's only a matter of time before audio meters are included as part of the camera.
I hope so, yeah.
And we both long to have a waveform monitor on the camera as part of it as well.
It seems that if you can put a waveform monitor in one of these, you know, sort of sub £1,000 monitor, then you can probably put it in the camera. But who knows? I mean, I'm not an engineer. The fact is there is a number of tools available today, whether you've got legacy products that will still work with a bit of adapting, or the latest technology, and I don't think any of these companies sit still. So they're going to be developing HD SDI options. You know, this is just merely a starting point to give you some insight to the things that we've been using. The real kind of salient point here is that I can't say, you know, people often ask us, what should I buy? You know, it's getting tougher because you need different tools for different filming environments. And the best advice is, you know, get your hands on these, go to trade shows, try different things out. You know, I'm not overly crazy about the build quality of this aspect of the EVF, but that aspect is phenomenal. Whereas the build quality of the Zacuto is unparalleled. You know, you can drop this, it's got a guarantee. I'm not sure how well this would stand up to being dropped. And, you know, that's just practical insights from 20 years shooting. You always drop stuff. It doesn't matter how careful you are, you're always going to drop something. If you drop it, is it going to fall apart? That's got to be a consideration when you're investing not insignificant amount of money on accessories. And what I will say at this stage, and I'm sure you'd agree, James, just because the camera is a couple of £1,000s, don't be put off by the fact that you might spend another couple of £1,000s on rigs and accessories and monitors, and that, you know, you might end up spending £5,000 or £6,000 overall for an entire package. But wow, what a package you're going to have.
Completely.